by this guy named Paul Koymans, who is a psychometrician, and he makes a lot of like high range IQ tests that are designed for measuring basically a lot higher levels than the usual. He said there's something called the associative limit or the associative horizon, which is basically like a person's, you could almost consider it the range at which they can see things that relate to any specific thing that they're looking at. And so people that are really good comedians, oftentimes what will happen is that they'll have like a large associative limit, or they'll have a lot of openness to experience. And then they'll also have the ability to explain what they're seeing in terms of a succinct pattern. And that's what like becomes really funny, is whenever it seems like they're explaining these things that should be unknown because they're cross-contextual in the same succinct pattern. And that's what like leads something to be unexpected, right? Is like if it doesn't quite fit to that pattern. And so it's almost like, you know, that the that it's there based on what's not there in a weird sense. But yeah, so basically the higher the IQ, in some senses, it's going to also imply that there will be more openness to experience. And if there's more openness to experience, these are going to be people who like, it's not going to take them as long to get a joke, for instance, because they're more open. So like whenever you say it, they're just going to hear it. And whenever it hits them, especially if they have a large associative horizon, they'll just see what it means really quickly, and they'll just start laughing really hard. Or maybe you'll speak to them and they'll say something that almost seems unrelated. Yeah. And in a way, this is just my opinion, but I would think you could almost measure a person's openness to experience just based on their creativity, in the form of whenever they ask you a weird question that turns out to be related somehow. And like, the more unrelated it seems to be, and then the more related it actually is, you could almost use that as like a measure, because it's like, oh, you're right, you saw something I wasn't thinking of there. But so yeah, I would think
acceptable. That's not socially acceptable to ask those weird questions.
At least true, which is a problem.
That's been my experience anyway.
Yes, it is that way. In fact, part of the problem is the fact that people don't really know about giftedness. They don't know about the fact that like every person that you meet might just see the world differently. Like, for instance, my little brother, he can just remember like 13 digits backwards if you just say them to him once. So he has like an extremely like ridiculously high short-term memory capacity. And as a result, he's gotten to like top 30 players in the world at this Dragon Ball Z fighting video game that he plays. And it's like whenever I give him like pattern recognition tests, the rest of his IQ doesn't really seem to be on the same level, but in terms of his working memory, it's like it gives him this huge, like, it's almost like he has a keyboard where the keyboard is like gigantic with all these things that he can do, but he can see the entire keyboard at once. Right. And it's not like he just forgets about it. So, yeah, so in that regard, it's like people don't realize that there are these differences between people. Like my little brother, he didn't do too well in school. So, you know, I ended up having to write an angry letter to my school actually discussing that. Like, basically, I was just asking what the heck. It wasn't until he was basically already getting into some disciplinary trouble as a result of his differences and his own internal, you know, strife and turmoil and just the struggles of adolescence, so to speak. I was just asking the guy, like, what the heck? You're going to wait until, you know, like some judicial enforcement requires us to figure out his capacity? That should be unacceptable. And the fact that this happens is because there isn't that level of awareness, and it should be the case. Teachers need to know about giftedness. Teachers need to know, like, 1 out of 50 students, that means that you're going to have one like at least every 2 years. If you're lucky, you might even have a couple in the same year, and they're just going to be in there, and they're going to be extremely different from other people. It's going to be the same. They're going to be as different from all the other students as someone in, you know, like the special education classroom is different from those students, but it'll be invisible. And it's like the types of things that this can lead to, it can just lead to so much. I'm sure you already know. It can lead to so much resentment and confusion. And especially when the gifted individual doesn't know that they're different in that particular way, they might start attributing that difference to things that are much more likely to be thrown at them as insults. Yes. And so that's when it just becomes catastrophic.
It must be me. It must be, I'm the weirdo. I don't fit in. And so it's something wrong with me.
Right. And then you portray that, like, so once you think that, it'll also become evident even in like your posture, even in your speech patterns. And then because people don't have this awareness, they're going to pick up on that, and then they're going to make it worse. So then your teachers, because your teachers know, oh, this is just some like nervous kid who doesn't like speaking, and whenever people try to talk to him, he gets all nervous, they're just going to start treating that kid a bit worse than they would treat the kid who might actually have a lot less potential, but just because they make the teacher's job a bit easier, the teacher is going to respond more appropriately, I guess you could say, towards, a more typical student.
Did they ever make you sit in the back corner in the class?
So, no, luckily that didn't happen. So what I did, honestly, was I just looked out the window. Like, I reached a certain point where I just stopped paying attention. And so eventually I just started like writing like poetry or rhymes or lyrics or whatever I was getting obsessed with. And I would do nothing but just write that all day. And then in the last few minutes of every class, I would look over at my friend who was sitting beside me and I'd be like, okay, what did I miss? And then basically he would just explain everything that had happened over the last 3 hours in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And and so it was like, okay, great. And it was kind of problematic because in school, you notice that there are differences between yourself and others, but you're not quite sure what to make of it because it almost seems like it's something that you can tell that you're the one who has something kind of strange. And it's something that appears to be helpful in certain circumstances, but you haven't been taught to think of it as helpful. And in fact, depending on like if you truly choose to express yourself, you might just have like a bunch of mean girls basically just raining on you and being like, oh, nobody likes to know it all. You know what I mean? And then that'll just make the person feel even worse. And then they'll definitely stop participating. But and it gets bad. And there's a lot more that goes into it. There are some things that people don't really know whenever it comes to the dark side of giftedness, because all everybody ever wants to do is look at like, okay, we can exploit this person for, their standardized test scores. 5 years later, okay, we can exploit these people for their SAT scores. 5 years later, okay, we can exploit these people for their inventions, right? And then now we live in this kind of society where people call Bill Gates the Antichrist on their Windows PCs. That's what it is. It's literally exploitation of the gifted so that other people can hopefully like try to match the same level with all of these tools that are put out by the gifted. But then they just want to throw the gifted aside. Basically, they want the gifted to prove that magic exists so that they can throw us onto the stake and call us witches. And I would not be surprised if a large percentage of the Salem witch trials were actually exacted upon gifted individuals, maybe even people who had Aspergoid symptoms. People who weren't so good at communicating with their fellow villagers, maybe they would just go and like build a tower outside the village and focus on their weird kooky devices and alchemy. They're going to get rage mobbed. And it hasn't really changed too much inside the hearts of men. Luckily, we have a structural society that contains these things, but human beings are still the same as we were, like 200,000 years ago or so.
And I also think that,
can you see the private chat on your right, on the screen?
What was that?
The private chat on the right of the screen.
Yes. Let me see.
I wrote you a message. Could you maybe you can read it aloud?
John Francis Oscar. Oh, okay.
He was a great Canadian composer and pianist. Absolutely, the person extraordinary. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2007. I was wondering if you may list him as
we might be related. So my grandfather apparently had a bit of a falling out with his own immediate relatives, and so there was a bit of a disconnect. My ancestors and relatives are originally from Canada, and then slowly they migrated south over time. Eventually, they actually founded on the way a town in Wisconsin, which is it has our last name. It's called Arpin, Wisconsin. I think there are around 300 people there. So, but by the time they settled in the state of Arkansas, which is where I hail from, the connections with the old family members had worn so thin that I would assume that we're related, but there's no way that I would have ever met this person. Well, I know you said they passed away years ago anyways, but
in 2000.
They were still even same story.
Just fantastic.
On IBMTV, I would like to introduce all our panelists. So we have Julien Arpin, one of the genius and highest IQ person in the world right now. We have Jim Aid from California. He does Chess Without Borders on Tuesdays. And then we have Alexander Starr. He does a couple of shows and he's a part of IBM family since almost a year or so. And Alexandra do modern investing with Sasha. So where the chess starts on Sasha Star, which happens on Saturday. We have bro Michael from Nigeria, and he do a show with us on Friday, Mind Closet 101, produced from Nigeria. And then we have Ben Coates from the Great Britain, and Ben and me still have to work out a show basically, but Ben is a part of our family on IBM TV from Great Britain. And then we have Sharif from Malaysia. He's a PhD scholar, and we're also working a show with Sharif, so maybe happening sometime soon. So that's the panelist we have. And Julian, I would like to know something that do we have a database, kind of an IQ database from people around the world that we have so many good IQ people in medical industry and so as in IT industry or maybe different industries? Is there any database which we can track on or we can refer to?
Very good question. So I know that members of Mensa, so when you're a Mensa member, you're able to go and I believe check the database for other fellow Mensa members. So I know for a fact you'll probably be able to find some names there. However, I'm not sure if there's a service that's specifically dedicated to saying like, oh, you want to use a doctor? Well, there's a smart doctor over there. You should go there. That's actually a great idea for a business. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, you should make that. I'll help.
And why I asked you this question is that right now we are all suffering from pandemic. So I wanted to know the people from medical industry with great IQ that how far we are from the corona vaccine.
Okay, so I'm not in the medical industry, but I mean, I do know a few people. I know this one lady who she has an IQ above 180, and she is a doctor, and she's always sharing things related to the coronavirus and the progress that we're making. It seems like we're pretty good in terms of getting a vaccine out to the people at some point in the next 3 months. Haven't there been like a lot of advancements from Oxford University with that? Did you guys see anything about that?
Sure.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll go through.
Hi, Julian. How are you? Good to meet you.
Doing well.
Yeah, good talk. Yes, there has been a lot of advances from Oxford University, and the race is on to order the vaccine. Which, of course, now the unfortunate thing is that they've come up with a vaccine, which is fantastic. It now becomes a commercialisation thing. So that's the problem we've got, and we've placed orders of 90 million. The UK have to jump the queue. Whether that's going to benefit the majority that have COVID, or whether it's, nobody will know. But one interesting thing I personally like to ask you is, what's your mindset been like during lockdown?
Oh, my mindset pertaining to the pandemic?
Yeah.
So, so whenever it first began, I kind of saw little signs of it on the internet, and I mentioned it to my boss. So I'm a software developer, and so I basically, I'll be on the internet sometimes reading the news at work. And so I mentioned these things to my boss, and they became increasingly worrisome, at least to me. But to him, they didn't quite seem at that point yet. And it's not that he was, like anti-science or anything like that, but it hadn't quite reached that point at the global forefront. Finally, the day before it was declared a global pandemic, I just saw some numbers that really floored me. And so I contacted my boss. I'm just like, hey, please let me work from home. Please let everyone else work from home. This is really bad. It's about to get really bad. And he was at least, compassionate enough to be like, you know what, Julian, you can work from home. And he was like, you can work from home and you can return whenever you think it's safe again. I was like, thank you so much. And in some ways I kind of felt silly, but I felt like just based on the objective evidence that I'd seen that it was warranted. And then the very next day it was declared a global pandemic, and then everybody was mandated to work from home. So I was aware of it from the beginning, and I was able to jump the gun a bit and stay home and stay healthy. And other than that, at first I was overly cautious just as I was waiting to see how everything unfolded. I wanted to see, okay, we need to see how it starts to spread. And then based on how quickly it spreads, that'll tell me how comfortable I really can be when it comes to interacting with others, So at first I was a bit over the top whenever it came to being, I guess you could say, COVID free. Like whenever I got anything, I would have it delivered, and then I would have it put in the trunk of my car, and then I would have it like just left there for days. I would only order things that I could leave in my trunk for 3 days. And I was careful about it. I just tried to avoid going outside much. In fact, my hair was extremely long yesterday. And Ankit saw yesterday before my haircut, I decided to use it as an excuse just to see what my longer hair would be like, because I'd never had long hair before. So I was like, hey, why not? I'll let it grow out, because it's not like there will be many eyes on it. So I had that. It was fairly difficult emotionally to deal with, I guess, like the initial fears. It was kind of diluted by just all the political turmoil that's taking place in the United States, particularly in of like George Floyd and what happened with him and that horrific mess. And so that became so terrible that, it made the situation worse as a whole, but eventually it kind of just detracted and distracted from the entire COVID situation. And that seems to be the case when we look on the news and we see 10,000 people marching down the street, just like basically elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder. And it's the same people that were saying, like, you're not allowed to go outside. And, man, whenever I see these things, basically so there is an interesting positive that came from this, okay? And that's this. So since 2017, I've tried speaking on these points on, raising awareness of giftedness and on these things like psychometrics and just the structure of society, how IQ can even lead to class division. And I've tried speaking on these things in many areas, on many forums, and usually there's a certain level of resistance to the receptivity to these ideas. And what ended up happening as a result of the COVID situation, maybe this is a silver lining in a dark cloud, I'm not sure, but basically people were forced to admit, like, wait a second. So first, I said this before any studies were done. I called it because it just makes sense. Like, evolutionarily, statistically, I said, people who have lower IQs are more likely to be spreading the COVID virus because they're not going to be able to detect situations where basically they're not going to think, oh, there's a random person and he's wearing these shoes that indicate he probably just got off the plane. Maybe I shouldn't talk to that guy. Like, they're just not going to think this. You know what I mean? And so yeah, eventually that was proven to be the case. And so now it actually has slightly shifted the opinion on the internet of people related to intelligence altogether. Now people are more accepting of intelligence differences because they have these clear icons of the intelligent individual, i.e., you could consider it, the individual on the moral high ground, pro-science. It might be like liberal as of right now. And then we have the image of like what is bad. And as of right now, it appears to be anti-science, which is like IQ in parentheses, and like Trump supporter type ideology. So as a result, all of this, pandemic hoi polloi has actually led people to be more serious about intelligence differences between others. And this will be the case anytime there is a major threat to survival. Whenever your survival is threatened, that's when you become aware of the things that can threaten your survival and the things that can, maybe represent some hope of getting away from the threat altogether. So,
which is what your definition of intelligence was.
So again, there are so many different types of things that can go into it. We can look at it roughly as saying it could be considered your ability to navigate between the range of all possible responses to a scenario in order to bring it to an end that both serves you and serves maximizing your future freedom. So it seems that future freedom seems to be the overall goal of intelligence, I guess.
That's right. And also, I wanted to ask you about, we have one of our founding principles in America was anti-intellectualism. And I believe that has been a characteristic of a lot of our politics. Obama was disliked because he was thought to be talking down to people, because he was articulate, he was eloquent as a speaker. And so there is a distrust of intelligence built into the American character.
Right. Well, it's actually so. Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers in this. I would say that the distrust of intelligence, so it is slightly built into the American character, but it's there are a few nuances because the people that built America probably were gifted themselves.
Absolutely.
And that's probably part of the reason why they were like so upset about the things they were seeing, that they were led to make certain changes. So again, it's like you get this situation that I was describing where people want to use Bill Gates's machines to call him the Antichrist, or anything that you could But yeah, it seems that way to me. It seems that gifted people probably made the modern societies that we're interacting in, but because it wasn't quite clarified exactly, I guess you could say the role that giftedness plays, really giftedness isn't even that important until you achieve a modern society. And the point's been made by some people, like if you're just, in a village, right, like your IQ is 150, you're still just going to be like breaking and, like harvesting like everyone else. And it's not really going to be that slightly improved alterations or outcomes, but only now in our modern society does it make as much of a difference as it really seems to. So in some ways, I think this anti-intellectualism could technically be maybe. So I think that there's the structure of the society, and I think there's the anti-intellectualism within that. I think the anti-intellectualism is part of the framework of human being that the structure of society protects and encourages. So I think that it's more that the structure of society encourages anti-intellectualism by some like tragic accident in some way.
That's very interesting.
So, Julian, would you suggest that before elections we should check the IQ of the candidates and then based on that we can vote?
Well, actually, I would say that, yes. But the thing is, 70% of elections can be predicted just based on who the people consider more attractive. So it turns out simply who is more attractive, they're going to win like 70% of the time. So that kind of begs the question, well, would having a high IQ be attractive? Even if, because the thing is like having a high IQ, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's like they might be able to solve the questions, but if the people think that it's going to make them harder to communicate with, which would make them uglier, maybe they'll think it's bad. But if the person's look is based on this whole idea of like, yeah, like I am, like for instance, take the book Chess for Dummies. You know what I mean? It's a bunch of brilliance that's kind of packaged in this idea of not appearing so brilliant, and that's why it was able to sell. But if it was a book called like Chess, Dummy, then maybe it wouldn't have done as well because it would have achieved a different end. So whenever it comes to the IQs of people, I would say that it doesn't matter. Like it matters a bit. It doesn't matter as much as it should because of the social repercussions that there would be. But it is especially pertinent, I think, whenever we're dealing with candidates who are just extremely old. Because once you reach a certain point of age, then you might have things like dementia or, Alzheimer's. And these things will basically show up in IQ tests, in the different types of IQ tests, especially the best IQ tests, like the neurophysiological exams that are given by doctors to assess all sorts of things. Like, for instance, ADHD, you have to take an IQ test to get that diagnosed in many places. I know I'm technically diagnosed with ADHD, but I didn't have to take an IQ test. I was just given like a personality questionnaire, and my mom was giving one. And basically, it just seemed so extreme. They're like, "Yeah, you probably have it." Hey, what's up?
Do you feel like you have a label though, Julian, when you were diagnosed with ADHD, or do you feel that people do? I mean, I spoke yesterday. I do something called the Dyslexia Awards in the UK, and that's to celebrate people with dyslexia because they are labelled by the majority of people, if we're honest. But what we're saying is that, yes, they might struggle with their numbers, they might struggle with the letters, but they will benefit elsewhere.
Right.
So we're actually celebrating dyslexia. And I know certain employers in the UK will look at where they do have the disparity, and then they will look where they have the massive advantage over somebody else, and they will use that skill in their business because they're going to be far more enhanced than somebody that's at a level. So do you feel that we do label people quickly too much with ADHD and dyslexia and things like that rather than look at the positives?
So whenever it comes to it's like what's in a label, like what's in a name, and those things that are in it, what would make those necessarily positive or negative? So whenever it comes to the negatives that are associated with these labels, usually they are always handed out too quickly. And it's usually because the ones that are handing out labels will somehow benefit. Somehow it's like they're in some kind of social position where they can protect whatever edifice they're standing upon by labeling these other people pejoratively. But it doesn't. So the thing is, even if they were to take that person who's labeled negatively and just make them look like Hitler, that wouldn't actually mean the person is really bad or really wrong. And so it kind of gets into these things like, what are we really dealing with here? Like, what's really the cause and what are really the effects? And what can we really say deserves a certain label? So I can say for a fact, so many mental illnesses are nature's failed attempts to create intelligence. And what I mean to say is that there's a lot of genetic overlap between, for instance, intellectual giftedness and things like ADHD, and between dyslexia, and between schizophrenia, between bipolar disorder, and these certain things where it's almost like they were some attempt by Mother Nature to create a form of intelligence. And it was almost like it just went haywire in the programming with something, and now this person, they see relationships between things that aren't actually related, or like they get ideas that they shouldn't get based on the things. So in many senses, a lot of these things are directly related to the intelligence. And whenever it comes to whether or not they are, I guess you could say, hastily and spuriously given to people, I think they definitely are. And I think that the reason that they're given, or the reasons that they're given so quickly, these can vary a lot. So whenever it comes to the individual who might be intellectually. Here's the thing: if you're intellectually gifted and you have a disability, those things can actually just cover each other up. Where you'll just like basically no one's going to recognize your giftedness, and they might not even recognize your disability because you use your giftedness to cover it up. So, for instance, when it comes to dyslexia, people with dyslexia turn out to be pretty good at rotating shapes in their head, right? In their heads, because it just seems to be like part of it. People that are good at ADHD, or people who have ADHD, seem to be rather good at enterprising new creative ideas and at doing what's called bridging knowledge gaps quickly.
Yes.
Basically, people with ADHD are so used to forgetting about the things that they're trying to say or something, or like they're so used to just not caring about this thing anymore that they'll learn to just, squeeze so many things in. And so it's like whenever these things, so some parents, and okay, so there's a lot that goes into this. There is incentives to be diagnosed with one of those conditions as opposed to being diagnosed with, because at least those conditions will get you the resources and the help that you need to be able to navigate throughout the day properly. If you're extremely gifted and your nervous system is so sensitive that light just impacts you deeply, seeing a person cry just impacts you so deeply, people won't even care. It's like your school system, they're supposed to be the ones who at least pretend to care, but they won't even do that because they don't even spend time teaching up-and-coming teachers about gifted students in university. They hardly even spend time on dealing with giftedness when you're becoming a psychologist. And as a result, I usually end up schooling every psychologist I speak to in the realm of giftedness, because they'll just speak to me with basically they'll just repeat the same things that you'll get from reading the table of contents. You know what I mean? It's like there's no depth to it.
Julian, were you prescribed medication when you were diagnosed?
So it's kind of funny because I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was already finishing up with high school. So it was a bit ironic because they diagnosed me, they gave me the medication, and I'm just like, oh, wow, like suddenly it seems a lot easier to have conversations with people like they were always having with each other. Maybe there is something to this. But, by then I was already like so far gone down the rabbit hole, started to think out, my foot was out the door. So I guess you could say the damage had been done, but all's well that ends well. But yeah, the medication, how does that affect IQ? That's something that I've always kind of wondered about. So it seems to, so I've noticed that whenever I take my ADHD medication, it's like my field of view becomes a bit wider. But as a result of me seeing more things at surface level, I don't have immediate depth whenever I'm trying to analyze things. So what this can mean is that maybe I'll do better on a test where I'm trying to see simple patterns that are hidden in a mess. But maybe I'll do worse on a test where it's like you just have two things that somehow interact, and it's like you got to figure out how they somehow interact so you can pick the next one. Maybe I would actually do a bit worse on that one because I would just be too busy looking at, I would be paying attention to physical things. So yeah, it's interesting. So in some ways, it's like it might be able to increase some skills while decreasing others, and everything's always give and take. And it's just a matter of, are the gains what I'm really after here?
And
Julian, let me ask you, please. I've heard so many stories about guys with IQs, and one of them is they're game freaks and they don't sleep enough at night. Is that true?
You said that they what at night?
don't sleep at
Are
night.
they don't sleep enough at night? And two, they're game freaks, like TV games, like playing adventurous games, soccer. Is that true?
So I think it is true. So because people with high IQs have really active minds, and there are a few things that go into it. So if you have someone with a really high IQ who is also maybe like persecuted by the people around them, they're going to be even more motivated to stay up extremely late when there aren't any other people around. You know what I mean? Like they're actually just going to feel free. And then whenever it comes to being more engaged in games, an interesting thing about, okay, I guess you could say maybe it would be more true for males because I think males are a bit more inclined to like conquer and to compete and things like that.
Yeah.
But it seems that IQ almost has this drive to apply itself. It's almost like it knows that it was built to be applied to a circumstance. And so people with high IQs, they find themselves trying to do the things that they're good at. And maybe that'll also be increased if they're persecuted, right? Like maybe if you have someone who is like a gifted kid growing up in a poor household with like angry drunk parents who are far from gifted, maybe they'll just talk so much nonsense and say so many mean things to that kid. And then the kid, in order to validate themselves, they're going to be like, okay, maybe my parents will say that, but I still have the highest score in my city at Tetris, you know? And so these are things that will motivate gifted people to try and to justify their own existence and their existences, and to not feel bad about their differences.
Just
Then
going
what
back
about
to
sleeping at night?
You said
All right.
sleeping? So yeah, I think that they'll stay awake longer. I think that they're going to be motivated to stay awake longer because of pressures around them. I think that they're going to also have more difficulty quieting their minds in order to fall asleep. So I think that those two things together will lead gifted people to be awake more. And then maybe there could even be some kind of thing that I don't know about in terms of evolution. Maybe smart people benefit more from being in a world where most people are asleep. I don't know. I mean, it could be the case, to be honest. But I do think that people with higher IQs will have a harder time going to sleep in general, but not always. So usually it's like with ADHD. People with ADHD can also have more difficulty falling asleep. And so what we'll do is we'll just get used to staying up so late that we're just exhausted, where we can just go and collapse, and we never really worry about it. And then it just becomes a matter of discipline in the morning of like waking up. So I do think that they'll stay up late, and I think that it's part of coping mechanisms of some sort.
Yeah.
Julian, just a couple of things quickly from myself. Were you seen as when you were a child? Were you seen as hyperactive because of you were always active?
Yes.
Mentally. Yeah, and you were labelled again. This is the problem with the world, isn't it? We're always labelling people. And two, do you feel the education systems, and I say this across the world, try and improve the weak points rather than working on the points that you are the best at, and is probably going to create your future?
So yes. Okay, so yes to both of those. First off, I was hyperactive as a kid, and my grandma told my mom there was probably something wrong with me. So that was interesting. And then the other thing, so education systems definitely do aim to raise the floor of society. But as far as I can tell, this is the logistically smartest move to make. It's not that we can hope to actually benefit everybody. And so the best thing we can do is to benefit most people. And
Lowest common denominator.
yeah, and it really does. Like, for instance, so let's take some things into account here. So if you look at the IQ distributions of males versus females, well, they have the same averages, but the bell curves for men, the bell curve is a bit wider. So what this means is that women are a bit more normalized and similar to each other, and men are a bit more likely to be like nature's experiments, so to speak, where sometimes, they're just going to try a bunch of random genetic outcomes, and sometimes it's like men are going to be a lot more mentally disabled, but also you're going to get some men that happen to have these like crazy advantages at other certain things. And so evolutionarily speaking, the reason that it might be selected for that women would be more similar in intelligence is that they need protection from the entire community during the 9 months that they're carrying the baby, and also even in like raising the child and in being able to connect emotionally with the child. You have to mindset, and in order to then navigate in the society, you have to train the child to navigate in the society, which means you have to still be somewhat like similar. You have to have a similar conception to the people that will basically define what the society is. So as a result, nature itself has shown us that it is sometimes better to simply normalize, to basically the collective can benefit more from normalizing. That way there can be fewer extreme losses, because it can turn out that an extreme victory doesn't actually give as much as an extreme loss. And this is partially related to diminishing returns and the fact that, like depending on what the loss is, it could just undo millennia of advantage. But yes, for these reasons, I would say that the academic system does just, cater to the lowest common denominator, does try to raise the floor. It does, in some senses, try to even truncate the gifted and to get them to conform a bit. But as far as I can tell, that's based on some rational processes. And the only way that it would become irrational would be if we were to raise awareness like I've been describing, where we were to say, but the thing is that people have different levels of awareness. And in which case, it no longer becomes fair to just say, let's bring people from not good enough to good enough. It also becomes a matter of, well, what is good enough for the individual? So, yeah, so to answer your question, yes, we are trying to just raise the floor, but it's not necessarily the worst decision that could be made, just based on the limited information that those designing the school system were given.
Well, I just think that, because of my age, I would definitely have been medicated when I was a child, because I would have been labeled all those things. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you, it wasn't until the 7th grade that I found someone that was like me, and we would make each other crack up, and we would be laughing so hard, and everybody would be staring at us, and they would be thinking, like, what are those two weirdos laughing at? But I was best man at his wedding. He's best man at my wedding, and we're still best friends today. He lives just in the town next to me, and it's been a lifelong friendship. But I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't run into him in the 7th grade.
Because it was like a gifted community. Yeah, and I mean, that's just like just having one person that you can look at and be like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not actually so weird. Maybe I'm just in a place that it affect me per se. But yeah, and that's exactly why people are drawn to these IQ groups as a whole, is because there comes a time where, it's like having to explain your joke just removes any comedy it would have had, right?
Exactly.
That's why Jim wears them shirts, Julian, so he doesn't have to explain the joke, you see.
But Julian, I'm also writing down many things that you've been saying, and I'm going to use them without any attribution. I just wanted to let you know. I'm not going to tell you that you said it. It's going to come out. It's going to sound like it's coming out of my mouth.
Well, no, I mean, that's good. Like, it's better because, I mean, these aren't things that, it's like I thought of. I've thought about these things, but these are things that people have been dealing with for probably since the dawn of civilization itself. There was probably that moment when there were the few individuals and they're just like, well, I don't really care what the Council of Elders said. This is what's going to happen, and I don't want that to happen. So, it's like this is a discussion that definitely needs to be had. And something else that's worth mentioning, there are pipelines from the academic construct into other outlets, including the prison system. It is built that way for a reason. It has been decided that some people are most economically profitable, not whenever they're left to their own devices because they're not going to do anything, but just like from the perspective of, the overseer, so to speak. Yeah. So they're like, hey, let's just go ahead and like shoot these people through. The problem is that a huge number of gifted people will actually end up in that process. And it turns out that if a gifted person doesn't meet the emotional criteria that the teacher, that the school system is looking for, basically if the gifted student is maybe gifted in a way that's different from what's expected, or if they don't conform, or if they don't fit in, then they're probably just going to be swept into that chute. And what's going to end up happening is that they're going to go through their life living out this kind of situation where they just perceive the entire world around them as an ignorant adult that is to be played, that is to be outsmarted, and is to be smiled at when it falls. And so this again goes into like the dark side of giftedness, right? And I'm going to tell you, and this is something that most people don't know, and this might be something that even those in the gifted community don't want to think about or mention. Many school shooters are gifted students who are bullied, and there's no one there for them. There's no one that's going to help them. And they reach a point where they say, no, like, I'm not going to do this. You will be the one to suffer because I am better than you and I can prove it. And so then the gifted kids are going to be the only ones that are smart enough to go and get guns. They're going to be the only ones that are smart enough to get around all of the blockages that there might be. And so eventually you get in this case where it's like, they're the only ones who even could do that. And then a lot of them are the ones that are doing that. And it's just a horrible travesty because these were supposed to be the students that parents are dropping off at a building. It's supposed to take care of them. It's supposed to help them learn to nurture their abilities. Instead, they're forcing them to expose themselves to malicious bullies that are just going to wear away at them until whatever psychopathic tendencies are buried inside of them just explode. And yeah, it's extremely problematic. So there's a lot that needs to be said. And I'm glad that you're writing these things down. I'm glad that you're going to be thinking about them. Maybe other people will think about them too. And something that's really important, again, people care now because we can see how it relates to us in terms of the pandemic. That's really what starts bringing it to people's minds, or like things that relate to them. We can say, hey, you are using a Windows PC. Why are you so against Bill Gates? Is it just because you're jealous? The answer is yes. Yeah. But people don't really know that, Like, for instance, people aren't quite aware of their own human nature. The fact that I'm not aware of other people's human nature by default implies that I'm not aware of my own. And so, that's a huge problem as well. There are so many things about ourselves that we don't understand, that we fear, things that we try to truncate and remove and hide. But it's like ultimately there are some things that can't be removed. And some things, especially pertaining to like conscious awareness, there's no way that you can keep these things back forever. If the person's alive, they're going to be aware, and whatever that's shaped like, it's like you better adapt, as far as I can tell.
The problem is, Julian, is that we all want people to be the same. We don't encourage people to be better. We'd rather bring them down to our level, and that is through all systems. That is through all governments. That is through all media, and this is the problem: is that we're conditioned that we've all got to be at this level. No, go and let somebody be fantastic up there, because we're only going to learn and educate ourselves, if you want to, of course. Educate ourselves to raise the standards. And this is the problem, is that we're all trying to bring people down rather than raise people up.
Yes, exactly. And another thing is that, so again, the whole philosophical problem, what does it mean to be a self, right? Like if you take the situation of the ship that goes into the dock and it has a rotten plank, and so they're like, okay, let's remove this plank. And so they go to pull it off to replace it, but then they realize the ones behind that, it's also basically they have to end up replacing the entire ship, right? Every single plank, and then it leaves. Is it the same ship, right? And this is a question that has continued to baffle us. Personally, I would say yes if it had the same captain, because I would think it's almost like a matter of the function as opposed to the form. But it's still just like it goes into this, and so the question becomes, why is it that we are driven to bring people to the same level? It's because we can consider ourselves better whenever we can say that other people are worse. And so that's why we try to bring them down, and so we can put ourselves up. But there are a few issues with this. First off, being superior at something doesn't actually mean much. Like, for instance, you can be superior at something and still be like an extremely useless person. Or for instance, you could be really bad at something and still be an absolute commodity on a team. So what I mean to say is there's this kind of weird thing where people are so afraid of, if I acknowledge that this person has a gift, that'll be like me acknowledging that I am a piece of crap, or I don't have any value because I'm not the smartest person in the room. When really what we should be thinking is hey, it's amazing if that person has a gift. They can use that to help me with my weaknesses. It's great that I have these gifts. I can help this person over here with their weaknesses. And basically, it shouldn't be a competition. We should all kind of view each other as tools for each other, but not really in a selfish way, more of a way you have this ability. I think that's cool. Come help me out, as if you're a part of me. You know what I mean? And then in that way, it won't be a competition. And that's what society tries to do. It tries to unify us behind a common identity. So that's why we're headed in this direction, but we're dealing with the growing pains as we get there.
Embrace the weirdness, I think, as we do with Jim's shirts.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely Jim, isn't it, Jim? It is, though, isn't it, Jim? Embrace difference.
Absolutely.
Embrace it.
We can focus on our similarities or we can focus on our differences. When we're taught to focus on our similarities, but we have to embrace our differences as well. That's how we get along. But Sharif, in Bangladesh, when you were growing up, were you considered an odd kid because you were smart?
Me, myself.
Yes.
No, actually, that things never happen. But as I work with the education industry, and I have, because we were group of companies, so we have to build different kind of business, education, hospitals, and many more things. So that time, I find many students actually today. What his name? Anyway, he's actually discussing about many of the intellectual issues and other things. It's actually a really problem. And country like Bangladesh, this is actually problem. And for intellectual issues and other things, I think especially developing nations, I think we need to do some practice. Yes, Singapore, it's okay. Singapore has very good cultures, educational systems, and other things. So Singapore students from their childhood, they grow in that way, and they can improve their IQ and other things. Even IB education in Malaysia, they are also from their childhood, they're developing their this IQ and this kind of activities. But country like Bangladesh, yes, there are some schools, those who are good, but still there are, I think, many scope, especially developing nations. I want to say that so opportunities is very high. working opportunities, because there are a lot of room. Education industry you can focus, healthcare industry you can focus, energy sector you can focus, construction you can focus, IT sector, and there's a huge population. So I think definitely, there are a lot of room. Not only Bangladesh, I visited many countries. So I want to say even South Asia. Let's focus on South Asia, where 1/3 of the populations around the world live in South Asia. And more or less South Asia, you get infrastructure and other things. But still there is a big room for this kind of intellectual development and other things. But yes, I want to say this math Olympiad, physics olympiad, this kind of activities doing good. Even Bangladeshi students, you can see that they win silver and this kind of things. Even those who study even Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, those who doing very well in math olympiad, they actually directly get admissions and they studied over there. So yes, there are a group of peoples. I know, let's say Prothom Alo, they are the newspaper. They are working on that specifically field, but there are very big room for development.
But you weren't bullied as a child?
As, like it's happened. But one thing, just try to understand. Like let's say a country like Bangladeshi students and other things, we actually face a lot of challenges in our personal life. In like bullying is a very small issue in our countries.
Okay.
Even many students, they do not get 3 times food, they do not get proper dress, they do not get proper, they have to do a lot of fight. Even some of the students, maybe 20 kilometers they have to run to go to school, 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers. Even I know our central bank president, Dr. Atiar Rahman, he also like 20 to 30 kilometers every morning he run, he go to school, he finishes his school, then he go back. So country like Bangladesh, India, I want to say Pakistan, the different countries, people, even those who are now in top position in their personal life, they face a lot of challenges. It's not so easy.
Ben can relate to that, but I can't, because I always had clothes, I always had food, and so things like bullying were what traumatized
I understand. No, I understand. I understand.
Yeah.
It's happened, but you have to understand the culture, how we facing the challenge. Don't take it otherwise. Let's say USA has COVID-19 situations right now, and you people are very scared, and you are saying that, there are many problems, this challenge, that challenge, many things. Let's say a country like Bangladesh, 12 month, whole year and year, they are fighting against flood, they're fighting against cyclone, they're fighting against poverty, they're fighting against unsystematic approach. So that's why when we see, let's say Malaysia, when we see, let's say UK or USA, this is like a heaven for us. This is true. This is like a heaven for us, because our people, our communities people, they are really doing hard work. Even even recent, like economists said that child labor is very bad. But I want to take responsibility as a researcher, as an economist. I want to say, country like Bangladesh, this kind of country, child labor also we have to give priority, because many students, if they do not job, they do not get food, even the state do not give them education. So we have different challenges, we have different game ball, different portfolio. Yes, there are many rich people. It's not like 100% people is there. Even you see that most richest people last 10 years actually grow in Bangladesh.
Yes.
Most billionaires grow in Bangladesh because of unsystematical approach. Yeah.
If I sent you a package, you wouldn't put it in the trunk of your car for a few days, would you? You would just open the package up.
He's put it on. He's put it on. The package you sent, he's put on. It's that shirt.
He gave me a different address than his real one.
Speaking of the development and the battling of poverty in nations like Bangladesh and India and those surroundings, so I've actually read and seen that India, so they've started doing a kind of search where they actually go through some of the most impoverished areas And what they do is they give kids IQ tests now, like Mensa IQ tests. They're working with Mensa. And whenever they find kids who have high IQs, they pull them out of poverty and basically put them in schools with actual books and, you know, with actual chalkboards and things like this, and pens and pencils and paper. And they're doing this as a part of just the overall drive of reducing poverty. And it seems like it's really going a long way, and it seems like it's helping a lot of people. There's a documentary on it. Maybe I can find it and send you a link if you guys want to watch it. It just follows these 2 young girls that were identified as gifted in the slums. And it just kind of shows what life is like for individuals living in the slums and the things that they have to deal with. And it's like school for people in the slums just almost seems so, like, on the one hand, it seems like the only escape, and on the other hand, it starts to seem so arbitrary and disconnected from the daily struggles they experience, you know? Like, you'll see these girls and they'll go to school and they'll be extremely gifted, and then they'll go home and basically they'll just be responsible for just doing like all the chores around the house and just helping their mom do everything. And then the camera lady will ask the mom, did you realize that your child had this gift, that she had this kind of different level of awareness that set her apart? And parents will be like, no. You know, like they just won't really have a conception of that style of thing. And yeah, so it's really great that, in my opinion, India is using IQ proactively to help reduce poverty, whereas many societies, they'll be afraid to even touch the topic, and then they'll almost use it as a means of explaining the poverty itself, which it can do in some senses, but it can also be used to greatly uplift people, I think, if we just look at it properly in terms of some people have some special gifts, maybe we should let them help us, you know.
The actual education system is very misleading, though, isn't it, Julian? Because every day is education. You know, every day is education. So, you know, it's the way that they want you to be educated when you're in the education system. That's what we have to be very careful of. Until you get to choose in the UK, we choose options. So they get to, I think, you get to year 10 of the school system, and then you can choose what you want to be educated in. Whereas realistically, that's quite systematic. It's like you've got to learn this way until then. You've got to pick up every single skill until then, and then you can go and choose what you want. Well, maybe that option system should be at secondary school from the year, you know, the age of 9, 10, 11, when really you should have the basics, and you should then have more of a way that you want to go. And I'm sure that you yourself, with the gift you've got, you would have known by the age of 11 what you wanted to be educated on, what you'd have enjoyed. And if you enjoy it, you pick up more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's still the same to this day. I remember at the time, so I was asked by a counselor what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told her I wanted to be a ufologist. So for those who don't know, it means I wanted to study aliens and UFOs. And eventually she was like, oh, that's not cool enough. And I was like, okay, I'll switch it to planetary scientist. And so time went on. Now, I mean, I'm in IT. I guess it's not quite planetary science, but close enough. I can, use computers to do all the science, theoretically.
Well, you know how I answered that question? I answered mortician. I just wanted to see their
That's
expression.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Probably scarred somebody, Jim.
I was thinking about that.
Basically, we would like to introduce our panelists on board right now. So we have Julien Arpin, one of the highest IQ people in the world right now. We have Jay Maid from California. He does Chess Without Borders on ibmtv. We have Ben Coates from the Great Britain, Mugesh Media, and he represents UK, and he represents IBMTV in UK as well. We have Sharif from Malaysia, and we are working on a lot of shows, starting with the World Economic Forum from Malaysia. We have Katara, and she's one of our IBMTV authors, and then we are working on an author show soon, so she'll be part of it. And then we have 2 more guests. We have Mark Lee. He does a radio show with us on Monday, and then he does a lot of other shows on IBMTV. And then we have Jeff. Jeff does a show like Beat Wednesday on IBMTV, which happens Wednesday at 3 p.m. EST. So welcome to all. We'll start with Katara. So Katara, what do you think about IQ? And have you come across any intellectual or any person with a great IQ in your life?
Oh,
you need to unmute Katara.
You're just
I haven't. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of experience with, using the IQ system or testing or anything. I mean, I've worked in schools with students, and I've definitely come across some students who seem to be extremely gifted with academics and other talents and art and things like that. But I don't have like an official, understanding
Don't let
or
Julian
use of
intimidate
IQ,
you.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I don't think I could.
Not now it's shaved.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You should have seen me yesterday. I looked like I was about to throw some shurikens or something.
Hey, Julian, if I could jump in, I heard y'all were talking about IQ. I actually have a background in that as well. One of my jobs, in addition to the podcasting, is I work for a testing company. So we do a lot of stuff around testing and things of that nature. It's actually one of the leading ones here in North Carolina and around the country. So sometimes we feel that we like those tests because they are a measurement of what people's abilities are supposed to be, but there are also inherent biases. So like I said, there are a couple of things that come to my mind is that one, there's biases against folks based on race and other things of that nature. And then lately we've been doing more and more testing, and Anchor will be interested in this because we've been testing actually against the computer, meaning that the computer has already graded the paper, and then they want us to grade the paper to see whether we give similar kind of answers or things of that nature. Part of the concept that we're afraid of as testers is that it will eventually test us out of a job. Jim knows about that. You know, you can get tested out of a job and things of that nature, but we're afraid that it could do that. But one of the things that we found is that, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you feel about computers, they're not able to understand nuances. So kids will write about things that are related to their society and things of that nature. And we as humans might understand some of these nuances and some of these different kinds of things that are happening, whereas the computer doesn't get it. So like I said, they might make a reference to like some hip hop artist and things of that nature and put it in the context of what the hip hop artist was singing about or talking about. And the computer is looking at this as if it's gibberish because they don't understand the context of what the kid is writing. So that's some of the things that I know from my perspective is things that we have been worried about even in the testing field. Like I said, and I'll go ahead and name the company, it's a Measurement Incorporated, but Measurement has done a lot of work in that field, and they are concerned about wanting to find ways that we don't lose the gaps, that we don't create more of the gaps, that there's not people that are being unfairly treated because of whatever their race, their class, their accessibility. We've talked about this here before because of people don't always have accessibility to laptops and computers and things of that nature. So there's a number of reasons. It can even be rural versus urban. Being can relate to that because there's parts of London that are rural and there are parts that are very urban. So like I said, there can be those biases based on where you are in the sense of where you are in the country, whether that's here or that's the other places that do standardized testing. I believe London does some standardized testing. I'm not sure about Malaysia and some of the other places where our folks are at, or even India, but I do know that there is a concern about standardized testing here in America is the biases. So that's just my take on
I have to ask. I was kind of, man, I always hate kind of bringing up this topic just because it can be so incendiary. It can be so controversial. But why is it that why do you think the tests are racist per se? Because that's like one of the worst types of bias out there. Like, why that one?
We have to be careful.
Go ahead. I'd like to hear from Katara because she's an educator and an editor. But from what I found out, a lot of times they do not necessarily understand the context of where people are from. Like if you're bringing some of your flavor into where you are at, and a lot of times the tests are trying to give. They want you to free form or give like an answer based on whatever the stimulus that they give you is, and sometimes the answers that people are giving are going to be based on their experiences. And sometimes the testers or the people that are evaluating don't always have that kind of connection as well. So that's where I feel some of the biases exist.
So in that case, then, what do you think of things like, for instance, just digit span? Do you think that one is biased?
I'm sorry, what was it again?
So the digit span, assuming that the individual knows the digits 0 through 9, as well as, the next person would, do you think that one still has room for bias?
I think that's got less of a room for bias. I mean, there may be some biases, but I mean, we've done some testing that is mathematically based, and some of that is very much, like you said, it's like a 0 to 9 or a 0 to 2. And if the answer is either going to be 0, 1, or 2, then yes, it's hard for that to be biased because, I mean, it doesn't matter who's doing the test. They can do it blindly, and they would still be able to either give you the answer or not give you the answer. So things that are concrete, that have a concrete answer, that are not so much like essays. Essays are a little bit more open to interpretation. So like I said, that's where I think the bias exists, in those things that are open to interpretation. If it's not open to interpretation, like, you know, if we all know here that we're watching 1 + 1 = 2. If that's something that you're testing, then that's not as biased, because we all know that if somebody says it's 1, they're wrong. It's that simple.
Well, Jeff, you had your hand
Jeff,
up.
you have to say something, Jeff?
I think that racism is so old school that we're used to it, and that's why we don't change the paradigm about racism. And if we become more attuned to freedom and equality, then even the IQ story could even be told and be played differently. We have to evolve as humans and forget that racism was slavery and attack on a small group of citizens that are all humans, and so on and so forth. I think that's the dialogue that needs to happen to make change. And then my question about IQ, does it change from day to day? Because if a child goes in and gets tested, or a human gets tested on Tuesday, what about Thursday if they do the same exact test? So how fair is IQ? I think it's a bunch of crap.
Well, I mean, okay, so the thing is, whenever it comes to calling it a bunch of crap, you have to at least have reasons for that, and I'm sure you do. So what are some of the reasons for that?
I do, because I think that everything, you test somebody and then their score comes out low on one day, but it comes up high on the next day, but the first day that they were tested was to get the job or not. And they were just in a bad mood, or they got shamed by their parents that morning.
But like if a person gets, like, say a person has an IQ of X, and then whenever they become drunk, they generally score around like X - 20, and then it could be like plus or minus like 7 from there. And then they were to take an IQ test drunk and they got a low score. I don't think that the lower score like is actually representative of them like that.
I understand. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is that does IQ, is that really a measure of the human?
So again, I mean, it's kind of an opinionated thing to say whether or not it's a measure of the human. It's a measure of objective outcomes. Here's the thing. If you were to take every possible logical question that is logical and rational, all of these that could possibly exist, and then if you were to extract a subset of questions from that imaginary space, and then you were to administer those questions to a bunch of people, and then you were to score those people, what's going to happen is it will rank order people in the same order every single time, even though we're talking about the imaginary space of all possible logical questions, meaning that there's no way that all of them can be equally, like they'll be completely different. So what that means is that even though you'll have all these different types of items, they're still going to produce the exact same rank order. And statistically speaking, odds of producing the same rank order with a million different questions and a million different tries, it's so insanely small that saying that like IQ wasn't measuring something real it's almost like saying aspirin isn't necessarily real, because there's a chance that every person that aspirin has ever helped has just benefited from a placebo, or they just happen to recover at that exact moment.
But if a child that is born with a low IQ is not available or not qualified for that job, then it's obviously like 1 + 1 = 2. We understand that. And so the child was born with ADD or with whatever they're born with, and some DNA makes you have better IQ, but it doesn't mean that you can't play Chopin.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is like being able to get a job isn't really like that important. You know what I mean? Like if a person has a quality that makes them more desirable for a job, that doesn't necessarily make them better or worse as a person. That's almost like saying having a job is what determines a person's worth. And here's the thing, like you can't become an air traffic controller unless you have a certain intelligence level as a minimum. And they have to take tests to become air traffic controllers that basically test.
And I'm okay with that.
Okay.
And Julien, I've got a question.
Curiosity, are there any logical, like opinion-based questions on IQ tests? Like I said, that's part of what I think that's where.
Yes, there are. Of course there are.
And how would those graded? Because like I said, I can think that I am a proponent of say marijuana legalization, or an anti-person for the death penalty, or things along those lines, or even a supporter of, to some degree, reparations. I actually just did a special with Sandy Darity, who's a friend of mine, who's all about African American reparations and things of that nature. But how are those graded on an IQ test? Because that's an opinion, and I don't know how you would grade that on an IQ test, because it's an opinion, and I'm trying to figure out how that would be graded
It's
on
all
an
about
IQ test.
statistics, though. In the real world, the statistics will talk about Jim Crow, that more people of color are arrested. So that's 1 + 1 = 2. We know that that's true.
Yeah, the thing is like there are all these underlying causes, and whenever it turns out that the causes of the causes are tangled up, that's whenever things become almost self-defeating, even as we're trying to add clarity to it. So whenever it comes to a situation where maybe you're asked a question where, so for instance, say somebody just asks you, hey, little kid, tell me the similarity between salt and water. Okay, so this is something that's based on opinion, but there are also some logical connections that can be drawn. Ultimately, from what I've seen, from just like all of the IQ tests that I've ever seen, and all of the people that I've seen take them, and it's also true that once you start getting nearer to the ceiling effect of a test, your propensity to provide alternative solutions that are equally viable will go up. So it's like the higher you score, the more likely it is that you'll be able to actually have opinions that are worth considering whenever you're arguing for answers, and so to speak. But ultimately, the goal is to find the logical theorem that can explain the highest proportion of the given circumstances with the most succinct possible representation of the theorem itself. That means if your theorem explains everything, but it takes 7 words, his theorem explains everything and it takes 6 words, assuming that the theorems aren't just synonyms, because you can have, you can make a phrase longer without actually changing its meaning. The one that explains the most data with the most succinct theorem will be the more correct one. And so whenever it comes into play of, okay, well, how do you actually gauge an opinion to that? That's when you have to start asking yourself, like, okay, so this person asked, they were asked, what's a similarity between water and salt? And this person might say, oh, well, those are both things from the earth that we have to eat in order to survive. Someone else might say a shark swims in it, because a shark will, swim in, many sharks at least will swim in salt water. So, and it's like, okay, when you look at this, how do you actually determine which one is correct or which one is incorrect? Or how do you determine when to stop saying, well, what do you mean? Can you tell me more? Well, what do you mean? Can you tell me more? Because eventually, if you ask them that, they'll eventually explain, they'll end up just recreating math. And so it's like, where do you put in that dividing line, right?
But that's leaning towards quantum.
But Julian, let me ask this question in a way that I can understand it, because I'll put it in chess terms. Some days I walk into a chess tournament and I see all sorts of possibilities. My ideas are just coming out of my ears, and I'm really good and I'm very effective and I win more games than I lose. In other times I show up to a tournament, I'm playing the same level players and I'm just not seeing anything, and I'm having a bad result. So what if you tested me for my IQ on the day that I'm having a bad result?
I mean, you would get your score on it's like you'll get your score whenever you're having a bad day. Like, for instance, there is value in, you have to understand. Yeah. Well, no, the fact that you can like change your mood and perform differently doesn't mean that your ability is actually changed. Like, basically, like if you have a bunch of IQ tests at your disposal and you become curious, you might be like, oh, I wonder what my IQ is like when I, have a few shots. And so then maybe someone will get a bit tipsy and then they'll take an IQ test and they'll be like, okay, now what's the difference? There will probably be a difference. Don't get me wrong, there will be one. But that difference doesn't necessarily say anything about how well you couldn't have done before this. I mean, at the very least, you can consider it as a minimum cutoff, right? I mean, if you look at your own performance, say if I was to say you're a good pitcher and you have a good sense of aim, I'll be like, here, dude, here's a bucket of basketballs or of baseballs even. Throw these baseballs through this little hole on the wall. So say that you have really good aim where you get like 7 out of 10 shots, but there are going to be these ones where basically if you track how it actually enters, you're the exact same person throwing balls that are arguably similar. We can say that you're throwing the same ball-ish, So you're throwing the same ball, same person, same level of effort even. Nothing's really changed. But what's going on here? Some of the balls will perfectly go through. It's like you'll have an average level of accuracy that all of your throws will cluster around. You'll have some that are pretty far, outside of that range, either above or below. And so then whenever you actually do the statistical distribution, you're going to find that your distances from the intended target will fall into a Gaussian normal distribution, which basically just shows that in general, like your average is what you'll get. And then based on like some weird circumstances, sometimes you'll go out. But in general, you have the fat middle, and then you have like very few on the outside there. So the thing is that the fact that there are differences between these different points doesn't actually disprove the whole notion, because the notion is something that exists between the continuum of each point. So it's actually like you could really consider a person's IQ not as their IQ score that they achieve at a single test that they sit at, but more as a kind of meta measurement that culminates all these different ones together.
Julien, am I right in thinking in Jim's scenario that Jim's intelligence hasn't changed, but his competence has changed in that scenario?
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. It's like, for instance, say you're measuring the horsepower of a car, but suddenly it's like the engine isn't able to rotate the wheels. Imagine the wheels, I guess, were how you determined its ability to perform. So it's like if you take away its ability to exercise its resource, then it might be tested as not having a resource, but it doesn't actually mean the resource wasn't there. It could have just been, like these statistical complications of, like having a bad day or even having a really good day.
So it's being when it's in that scenario, Jim, you've just got to think you're being incompetent. That's all. Your intelligence is the same, mate. You're just being incompetent.
It could just be the way you slept the night before. It could have even been the breakfast you had.
That's exactly the way I feel. Incompetent.
Yeah,
that's my point. And so maybe the testing gets evolved. So maybe we test 3 times, and then you take an average.
So the thing with that is it fair to take an average when they weren't all equally representative? Because what you're saying is like, say someone, usually what people do is they'll give someone a test, and if they do really well, they'll be like, okay, you should probably take another test because you probably just got lucky. Usually that's what they try to say. They try to say, this kid probably just got lucky. Like statistically speaking, it's more likely someone got lucky than is a 1 out of 100. So then they'll give them another test, and they'll be like, dang, this kid scored exactly the same. Or maybe they scored like a few points above or higher, but it'll pretty much be about the same. So whenever it comes to retesting is extremely important. And it's a matter of like what you're really trying to accomplish with the retest here, because there are some times where it's like you can be at full faculty, and it's just based on what you go into the test with in your head that can change the types of answers that unravel. So it's like if you're going to do these retesting sessions, you have to decide, like, am I trying to retest under a different state of mind, or am I trying to achieve the exact same circumstance? That way I can retest it. That way I can have some form of replicability. Then at least I can say, yeah, well, I always score this. But then even then, it's not the same. It's like you always score this under that case.
Well, Jim was talking about mood and on a wake up basis, mood could change. And so I believe that if there was an average, then that may be a more true representation
for the average. Yes, no, you're right. But the thing is that the average is like the test. So if you think about it, like an IQ question is almost just like this little simulation of a possible logical juxtaposition that you might encounter in the real world. And it simulates it in this little encoded symbolic form where it says like, okay, you have these things, and whenever they stack up, they make this shape. So, we see that you stack these, you get that shape, stack these, get that shape. What does this shape look like? And so we ask someone that, and then we'll ask them like 35 more of those. And so after you have 36 questions where you treat each question as its own little test, now you have this kind of comparative measure between them all that will give you a really good window into this person's like general cognitive ability percentile. And so the thing is that the more questions that you ask them, all that it does is become more accurate in the conversion, or in the convergence, I should say, and conversion too. But so adding more tests into it is really no different topologically, like structurally speaking, than just adding more questions into a single test. And so then it's like, well, okay, well, what can we change about a single test? Are there changes we could make to a single test that would match the changes that could be made to multiple tests? And so sometimes in order to do this, what will happen, especially nowadays in like the high range IQ communities where it's mainly high IQ people making tests for other IQ people, they'll make a bunch of untimed tests in hopes of kind of reducing this factor that you're talking about, which has to do with, I guess you could say, externalized confounding factors interfering with what you're trying to measure. So with those things in mind, maybe they'll take a test and they'll say this test is designed to be untimed. You're going to like basically everyone who takes it, what they'll do is they'll maybe just spend an hour or two on it, just looking every night, just, at different questions. And in the end, they'll just look back through it. And so at this point, it's like they've approached it during different states of mind. They've had the freedom to look at it throughout the day. They haven't necessarily been pressured by other people around them. And so now this kind of high range testing environment, it creates a situation where some assets or some aspects of facets and aspects of giftedness can come to the surface more clearly and maybe a bit more transparently whenever you remove that time limit. But at the same time, there are people whose giftedness, it almost seems to centralize around the fact that they're extremely fast. And so suddenly, whenever you give them an untimed test that takes away from their ability to represent what their advantage is, now their IQ score is actually going to come out lower. And the thing is it's like, well, does that mean their IQ is actually that low? It's like, no, that's what their IQ is whenever they're in that specific context. And it's the exact same as if, like someone just had a bad day or a headache or something like that. Like sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'll think I should take an IQ test just to see how badly I'll do because I'm not awake yet.
Well,
and
Nick, we've got to have this guy on more.
What?
I
had to bring in my ringer resident genius.
Julian, how do you deal with abstract thinking? Because a lot of times in the creative world and arts and things of that nature, you're thinking abstractly. Like you said, I can look at a piece of art or even create a piece of art and think of it in one way. Somebody else might think of it in another way. So one question I want to ask you, Julian, is how do you deal with abstract thinking? Because a lot of times people are not thinking in the linear way of thinking. They're thinking in abstract or creative ways, particularly in folks in my community, because I'm very much involved in the arts community. So that's my one question. And the second question I'm curious about is how do oftentimes people that are very much successful on one level, they are perceived as being not successful. I'm gonna give you an example. I just had a guest on the Online Dinner Party, which is one of the shows that I do here on ibm.tv. They are disability people. One of the guests was somebody that had cerebral palsy. The other was autistic. I actually have some friends that are autistic. And autistic people can be some of the most brilliant people in the world, but they are perceived as having a disability because of their autism. So I'm just wondering, from your thoughts, how you deal with that. Because like I said, the young lady that was Paper Hand Comics, she's an amazing lady, but she has all these crazy figures and things in her head. I have a friend that knows way too many sports figures. I mean, like you go to Robert and he could tell you like literally who the all-star pitcher was of a game in like some college that you don't even know. I mean, that's and I was using baseball. I know I mixed my metaphors, but I should have stuck with baseball. But anyway, it was a game of baseball and it's a college game and he's going to give you like ERA and all of that kind of stuff. But he's kind of like seen as an oddball, even though he's a genius in some ways.
Rain Man.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like you're describing like Rain Man style trivia,
which they do exist.
That's I would like to introduce Adifa. She's joining us from Nigeria after a long break because of the bandwidth issue. So we are trying to get her on IBM TV since 2 months. But today, finally, she is able to join from Nigeria. So Adifa, can you tell us about what you do and where are you from?
Adifa.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Yes, you can call me Nifesti. So thank you so much, Ankit. My name is Nifesti. Like I said earlier, I run a podcast called Inside Life on Anchor. So the podcast is basically about life, all the issues of life that range from business, education, health, finance. It's just basically for anybody who is evolving and who is on a journey of personal development. And anybody who wants to become a better version of themselves. So basically, this is what I do. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Adifa, are you in Lagos, Nigeria? Is that where you're from, or beaming in from?
Yes,
Nigeria. Okay, you're coming in really clear.
Lagos,
so-
Nigeria.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, because what we found out is that bandwidth makes a big difference on how well you come in around the world. But you're coming in really clear, so that's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
You
great.
look great. You sound great. Yeah.
Well, and Katara, where are you beaming in from? Katara?
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New York. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Rochester. That's where David K. Johnson lives.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you know him. Have you run into David on our show?
No.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, the lady that I was talking about that has the autism, that's the paperback, that's the comic, she's also out of the Rochester area. Her name is Liz Pritchard, so she is also out of that area.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Usually people that live in Rochester move.
Yeah, because it's old.
It's like Fairview.
Yeah. Well, Julian actually went from Fayetteville, Arkansas, a somewhat habitable environment, to Toronto, which I don't know the reason why. I don't know what the backstory is. I'm afraid
I
to
met
ask.
my girlfriend on Facebook. So there's this thing called Myers-Briggs personality indicator, and I learned about my personality type, and I found the Facebook pages for people of my type, and she thought she was of the same type.
Right.
So she's definitely my type, but it turns out she's not my Myers-Briggs type. She's just my type. So yeah, so I met her online.
Wait a minute. I got to back up here. Wait a minute. You said that you are
You're correct.
and you got a date off of online. So I'm like feeling like
Hey, Mark, this is where the high IQ stuff breaks down. It's called
this is where the high IQ breaks through on the computer. This is where we find love.
This destroys it all. As I was about to ask Julian, okay, how is this going to help my golf game tonight?
Well, I mean, hey,
we could have a whole show on COVID dating.
COVID dating.
Hey, yeah, we could do a show on COVID dating. I've heard that this is a real problem. I've had people tell me,
it's worse than AIDS. It was worse than AIDS, because at least with AIDS you could kiss somebody without being swabbed.
Hey, Jeff, why don't you share your story that you shared with us before about your horrible dating experience that you just had? Because you shared with us on the last show about this experience that you had where you met this lovely lady. You thought that she was your connection like Julian got, and it turned out not to be that great. So I'd love to hear that story again. I'm sure that Nick, who did not hear the story, would like to hear it.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, Jeff. You were sharing your story about
you're
the
on the
young
hot
lady
seat.
that you ran into.
You're on the hot seat, Jeff.
Oh, and explain that question again to me. That remind me.
You were talking about your dating woes, and the last time that me and you were on this show together, you were sharing about a young lady that you met, and that she ran, that you thought she was your match, just like Julian found his match. Sister, by the way, for those that don't know what sister is, that's an African American woman. But you said that you ran into her, and then the date turned out not to be as great as you thought it was going to be. So I was saying if you could share that story again.
Well, that's, I guess, like on any given day with IQ, the luck of the draw of the day that you meet that person, what mood they're in, and compatibility. And if you believe in angels, which is another whole episode, how we all get connected together. If we don't show up, then we don't get a date. And if we're not ready, prepared ourselves and our heart open, then that's even harder to be compatible with that person. And on that given day, it's the luck of the draw. You have to proceed, even in COVID, to meet people if you're a single person. But because of COVID being what it is, it makes it more difficult for us that are dating or not connected before COVID, because we don't know where the molecules get in, where the virus is coming from, and how it lives and how it lasts. Like in sports, does it live on the baseball? Does it live on the basketball? Does it live on the football? And we have to be responsible in our own movements on life, even in dating. And COVID sucks for dating. And when we had AIDS in 1983, at least you knew that you could kiss somebody because they said it was sexually transmitted, and you had to be careful.
I'm
Hey,
very
Nick, I don't
right
know if you noticed this, but I'm sitting over there looking at the picture because he's taking a water break. I probably need to
Yeah,
take
I
a
know.
water
I
break
wanted
as
to show
well.
you
But
what
I'm
his
looking at
gal
that
pal
picture
looks
on
like.
Julian's girlfriend,
Yeah,
and I'm already becoming a little bit on the jealous side because this young lady looks like a very
young lady.
blonde
Yeah,
and
she's
everything.
pretty
Julian,
cute.
it looks like you
Hey,
give
hey,
me a
Julian,
colorful,
we should bring her
brainiac
on.
or an egghead or whatever the negative terms that used to exist for smart people, and you can pull a very attractive young lady. Because I was watching your avatar when you went away from us and saw the pretty blonde that I guess is your girlfriend / fiance. So just wanted to give you compliments on that because it looks like you pulled a very young lady that dragged you out there to Toronto.
It was a good move, as they would say in
Yeah,
shows.
thank you very
Good
much.
move.
Not only is she beautiful, but she's also extremely intelligent herself. So it's definitely a match made in heaven.
Well, when is she going to be on?
Intelligent on any
you look good
given
in that
day.
photo too.
What?
I'm glad it was his girlfriend, otherwise you've all just dropped him in it.
Hey, Julian, I apologize. These people
Oh, no,
are
no
awful.
worries. Oh, no worries. No worries.
I said
Julian,
once.
I apologize.
I
These
said
people are
once,
awful.
everybody, that even the Dalai Lama gets grumpy.
You know, that's actually a good point. People always try to act like anger is so bad, but it's really not that bad as far as I can tell. It seems like it's actually a good thing, and that people who try to say it's bad are just doing some like weird control tactic. What do you think?
Well, it's worked for me.
Actually, Julian, you make a great point there about parenting. Because if you use not anger, not aggression, but if you use stern, let's say stern, as a shock tactic, they then know when they're doing right from wrong. Whereas too many people use it as an ongoing tactic, and they start to show their anger at all times. And the poor children haven't got a clue then when they're actually in trouble or not. So you're right there.
Yes.
Hey, Ben, question for you and everything. What would you do if you found out that your daughter, because I've seen her run around, you got actually 2 daughters, I think it is. But what would you do if you found out that your daughter was much more smarter than you are? Like that IQ test comes and she finds out that you got a much greater IQ than you.
I found that out without doing the IQ test quite a few years ago. Oh, brilliant! No, I embrace it. I try and be positive with them and tell them they can do anything they want within reason. And if they're going wrong, then we tell them. But then because we do it that way, I hope that they know that they're actually doing wrong. But we don't encourage people enough. It's not just parenting; it's on all elements. We don't encourage people enough. Julian today has been absolutely wonderful. We've probably learned so much from him because we've encouraged him. You know, I know he got more IQ, but Nick has obviously gone to a lot of trouble to get Julian on.
Listen, Ben, I had to troll all these IQ sites. A lot of them are fake people. All due respects, Julian. Okay,
not all of them. No, you'd be surprised.
No, a lot of them are, and some of them are negative people. Like that one guy. Well, we don't have the time to do anything. I'm going like, dude, you're projecting, dude. Okay, but I don't even know if he got it because I don't know if he's that smart. But it doesn't matter. Okay, the thing is, here's the thing that iced the deal with Julian. By the way, that picture with him and that gal pal. I said, well, he's got to be smart because he made the right move there and forget everything else.
That's why
I got a question for you. I want to know, do you teach when you're trying to educate people for life lessons? Do you talk about dating? Do you talk about how they should find their life partner? Do you cover any of that in your training?
Honestly, that's a really good question. It's something that I feel like I would almost have to get trained in it myself in order to feel confident with being like, look, I'm an expert. You should trust me on this. But there are a few things that I can say like for certain. So I believe that the IQ between married individuals correlates at above 0.4. Does that sound right to you guys? Anyways, basically, it seems like you marry people that are kind of similar to yourself roughly in intelligence. And so as a result, one thing is like, even if that girl is completely gorgeous and just like melts you, if you go and try and speak to her and, you know, even if she's completely nice and has all the best intentions, but it's really difficult for you guys to communicate on certain things, it could lead to problems. But it's what I always tell people is that intelligence differences between human beings that are trying to be together only matters if the differences are larger than their desires to make it work. What this means is that, like, once you actually care about the other person and you're like, yeah, I mean, I don't care if you're disabled, I still love you, or like, I don't care if I look disabled to you, I still love you, then you kind of reach a point where it's like, you know, I don't care if you're saying something that like makes me feel dumb because we love each other. And, you know, so it's like that. It's based on some things, like there's the personality. There is that general difference, like just like people will get with other people that remind them of their own pre-established beliefs and kind of remind them of like their perceived place in the universe, so to speak. People will kind of gravitate to others with similar intelligence. Whenever it comes to, I guess, how to speak with them, it's different, you know? So I can tell you, whenever you increase IQ for a male, it's been shown that it's actually going to overall increase the likelihood that they're going to get married one day. Whenever you increase the IQ of a female, it'll actually reduce their likelihood of getting married. And there are lots of reasons that go into this. A lot of things aren't good. A lot of reasons we don't even understand, because there are things about intelligence and how we perceive intelligence and how like biased against it we are that we don't even comprehend. It's been shown. So they did a study on OkCupid where they basically just had women looking at the faces of, you know, disconnected faces. They didn't know who they belonged to. They didn't know anything about the dating profiles or the personalities of the individuals. Maybe they could extract something from like a caller, but beyond that, they really knew absolutely nothing. And then they also gave the males IQ tests. What they found is that the women, having absolutely zero knowledge of the people's IQ scores, they were actually a bit. So the thing is, whenever they saw a male who had an IQ above a certain point, and then they asked the women, is this person attractive or are they not? They actually had a harder time deciding. So it's not saying that you know, the women were more likely to call the smart men ugly. It's that the women were unable to determine if the smart men met the biological criteria necessary to qualify as attractive, almost as if they were looking at a dog and you asked them to say, is this an attractive dog? What this shows is that there are actually differences. Like basically super high IQ people are almost like a different, like little cluster of their own. And not only are they their own cluster, it also manifests itself in terms of social patterns and behaviors that actually trickle up, and they've kind of manifested themselves in terms of some of the things I've described before.
Hey, Julian, just you mentioned that, because I have a friend of mine he worked with me at Measurement, the company I was talking about, and he actually was the research person for the metrics for eHarmony. So that was actually his job that he came from California to the North Carolina area for. So he's actually doing what you're talking about OkCupid did. His whole job was to study the metrics and to create those metric profiles in order for folks to quote unquote match each other.
Did you find the same thing?
Because Julian, that was a brilliant answer, but my question was really to our guests from Nigeria. I was wondering what you do. Yes, I was asking you whether or not you incorporate in your training of people to improve their social development. Do you include dating and that sort of thing in your education process?
Okay, yes, I do. But however, I just started podcasting about a few months ago. So dating, marriage, family life is definitely something that we would like to consider on my podcast. But for now, I haven't, but I hope to. I definitely hope to.
So you just need to listen to Julien, because you got to incorporate all of the things that he just said into your podcast.
Yes, and he made quite interesting. He made a very, very interesting and valid point when he mentioned that you have fewer guys who would want to show interest in women who are quite more intelligent than they are, because I think I found out that, especially from the part of the world where I come from, the men around here haven't really come up to that level where they come to accept that they are not intimidated by the success or by the intelligence or by the charisma or the competence of a woman who can do things better than themselves, or who has, she has better financial abilities or anything that is more than the man. So I realized that it's quite difficult for women who have a higher intelligence who have a better career life, I think the men folk perceive them as a threat rather than an ally. So I
Yes.
think that's really it's quite a problem for women who do better, or who the world qualify as success, to get to get into the dating game. So I think that's a very, 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 very valid point Julian made.
And
Yes.
it's not just a problem here
I
in
must say,
the
Something
sorry,
basically.
I got
yeah,
to
but
follow
it's
up
not
on
even.
this.
Go ahead.
Because I'm saying that, for me, I had to have someone, and I think Julian would agree, that at least matched my intelligence. I was never threatened by it. A woman was not that attractive to me if she wasn't intelligent. And my wife made more money than I did, and I didn't see that as a negative.
If I can actually ask
Right.
before Julian answers his question
Yes,
or answers
that's
your comment and
because
everything,
I think basically where it starts from is that we all need to learn to see that there is really no competition, or that there is really no problem when somebody of the opposite sex is doing better than you are, and you I think I seem to like this person, and I think, okay, let me take it a step further. But I think by the time most guys find out that, okay, she seems to be better, or she seems to do things better than I am, it kind of turns them off, and it just makes them want to leave, and it just makes them not to further pursue their interest in the woman. So I
It
think it's good for
demasculates.
you. It's good for you that you have that kind of mindset. But I think we men really need to grow up to that extent to accept it, or to love it and to cherish it. I think it's for the two of you. If she does better than you, it's still to both your benefits. So I don't think there's any problem with that. I think people really need to come to the understanding of that there is really no problem if I'm dating somebody of the opposite sex who seems to do better than I am. I think we just need to encourage ourselves, and like Julian made a very, very valid point, and when he said that even if there is a level of difference in our intelligence, we should have a willingness to be able to work on it. So if there's
Yes.
a willingness to work together and to grow together, I think that is the most important thing. So our differences do not really matter. What matters is if we would be willing to work towards that difference to achieve a common goal. So that's what I believe for me.
I agree with you, but I just want to add this
Can I
really
tell you
quick
something
before
basically?
Julian
So
answers
we are working with
everything, which is
I think
that
2
One at a
or
time.
so starting from Africa.
I think Marcus had something to say for a really long time.
thank you,
Yes,
Julian.
I think
What I was
Marcus wants to say
what
something.
I was going to add to you was I agree with everything that you said, the young lady from Nigeria, as well as what Julian said. But I will tell you that I live here in Durham, North Carolina, and there's a lot of people that are from very smart areas. This is a very much of a university town, and there's a lot of corporate women and things of that nature. UNC, Duke, and State, and a number of other colleges are here in North Carolina Central. And I can tell you that a lot of my friends that are intelligent, very intelligent, that are women will tell me oftentimes that men are intimidated by their intelligence, and that's why they sometimes find that they have to step down in their opinion
Yes,
and go to folks that are a
yes,
little bit lesser than their intelligence, because the men are too
yes,
often intimidated by them because of that fear that they are more intelligent. I actually
Yeah,
love
I love
yeah,
being
being with
corrected.
women that are going to be
yeah,
able to have that conversation with me, that we're going to be able to share the dialogue and have that common kind of bond and some engaging conversation, whether it's here on
yeah,
this platform or whether it's in real life and everything. That's what I prefer,
yeah,
and that's the way I was raised. My mom is a very intelligent woman, as are my aunts and things of that nature. So I was raised with strong, independent women. But unfortunately, there are too many people in society, and I would argue in certain societies even more so than others, that are intimidated by intelligent women, and that I think is a shame. And I wish that folks would get over that. That's a bias that folks have. We have biases against
yes,
people on different levels. The thing that I was curious about with Julian, I'm going to switch the conversation just slightly, is you talked about changes in the way people's appearances and things are. But as an intelligent person, how would you deal with it if, say, your girlfriend is very attractive, but say she was to lose a body part. She came down with breast cancer. I'm not wishing that on her. Don't want that to happen. But she had to have a mastectomy and things of that nature. So she would lose that part of her body, or she bumped her head. She's very intelligent, but if she bumped her head, she could have a concussion. She might not be as smart as she normally is. So as an intelligent person, how would you cope with that personally? I was just wondering your take on that.
Well, that's a question that's like, even if I was to spend time thinking about it, it's something I couldn't fully understand how I would respond to unless I was there. But as far as I can tell, I mean, whenever it comes to like physical alterations, it's easy. It doesn't really matter that much at this level of mental connection. Whenever it comes to the cognitive connection, if that cognitive connection was to disappear, then that would actually raise more challenges for me personally, just because I've always been more of a I've always relied more on that cognitive connection in terms of finding, qualitative connections with other people in relationships. So it would kind of depend. I mean, when I was 17, I suffered a pretty bad traumatic brain injury, and I woke up in the hospital a few days later. And, I know I've read that after you get a TBI, there are certain lasting effects. Like, for instance, it's apparently harder if you track the stochastic movements of a person's eyeballs. It's apparently harder for us to like read in a straight line after we get, a concussion and things like this. So I guess it would really depend on the nature of the change. I don't think it would change that much. At the end of the day, you could straight up just disconnect the brain hemispheres of a person and they would still kind of be the same person. They wouldn't even really notice the difference. I would notice the differences from the outside, but I would know that like it was pretty much still the same individual. I mean, it's definitely still the same individual, but like, for instance, did you guys know that? So there's this thing called the Corpus Callosum, and it's the bridge that connects your brain hemispheres, and it's how information travels between brain hemispheres so you can think about things. So it's actually found, since certain faculties of the body and mind will exist more in certain regions, if you disconnect the brain hemispheres, you can actually get a bit of a disconnect between external outcomes, to the extent that, say you cut the corpus callosum, a person's left eye is connected to their right brain hemisphere, and a person's ability to perform linguistic processing those abilities are generally mapped to the left brain hemisphere. So if you show a person an image but only show their left eye after their corpus callosum is cut, this means that the right brain hemisphere sees it, and you ask them, name the thing you're looking at. Since it's the left brain hemisphere that's able to name things, and it's in the right brain hemisphere that it sees it, but there's not a bridge, the person's not going to be able to remember what the name of the thing they're looking at is. And like they're gonna sit there and they're gonna be like, what do you mean? It's gonna be like, tell me the name of this thing. And he's just going to be looking at it. He's just not going to go there anymore because, it'll just turn out that, once you disconnect those hemispheres.
Because I know we're getting ready to get to gaming and
About
everything.
an hour now, I would like to introduce all the panelists right on IBMTV. We are almost wrapping up our podcast this Thursday, and we are starting Gamers Den now. We have J-Mate joining us from California. He runs Chess Without Borders on IBMTV. We have Mark Lee from North Carolina, and he does a lot of shows with us. One of the shows is Radio Show with Mark Lee, happens on Monday, 2 p.m. EST. We have Jeff Icon. He does a show on Wednesday, and he's a part of our family. We have Arifa joining us from Nigeria, and we are working with Arifa to do a lot of shows from Nigeria, starting from the podcast show which Arifa runs. We have Julien Arpin. He's one of the highest IQ person in the world right now. He's from Toronto, Canada. We have Arijit, and he's a gamer. He runs a gaming company back in India. He's from Calcutta, India, and we'll talk about gaming and all this stuff. We have Jetovi. He's from North Carolina, and he's also a gamer, and he does a lot of other things as well apart from gaming ecosystem. And we have one more guest. Aga Khan will be joining us in some minutes. So we can talk about games and IQ and all those things, because I think that also goes side by side. So I would like to start. Julien, what do you think? With the gamers, what kind of IQ they have?
You said gamers. So that's a really good question. So there are certain games that correlate more with IQ than others, right? So for instance, the game that was found to correlate the most with IQ, and it might be surprising, chess is an interesting one for sure. In terms of modern video games, there's this game called League of Legends, and it's basically a type of game where it's like real-time strategy, and you're just commanding like these armies, and you're overhead, and you see like all your troops, and then you try to go and conquer other people, and I guess their objectives or something. So I think it's been shown that that game correlates the highest from all the different games that have been tested as IQ tests that aren't intended to be IQ tests, at least. There are some video games that are kind of just like, you can tell they're secretly based on IQ test principles, and then they turn out to be something like an IQ test, but it's really not so surprising. But yeah, this game League of Legends actually does tend to measure it pretty well. And then there are also some games like Tetris, which can even improve your spatial awareness and like build gray matter. So yeah, they definitely go hand in hand.
So we have Aga Khan with us. I would like to introduce Aga Khan. He's a gamer and he's a popular among the gaming ecosystem in India. So Aga, would you like to say something about yourself, what you do and where are you from?
He's muted.
He's muted.
His microphone is muted.
There you go.
Is my voice audible, guys? Hi everyone. Yeah, it's nice to come here. Thank you for joining me in this thing.
So Aga,
So actually, I missed the part where you were introducing me.
Yeah, so I think that Ankit was trying to ask you a little bit about your game background and a little bit about if you could just share with us what your connection is to the gaming industry and things of that nature.
Sure. So I have a